guide. Saranno le audioguide queste. Occhio qua. Rosa, ragnatele, bello. Allora siamo appena entrati nella miniera. Occhio che qua se scendi veloce è un po' in discesa, ma guardate che roba. Oh mio Dio, è discesissima. Sì. Diego, non andare davanti a me che sto registrando. Occhio qua. Acqua. Si sale. Ma c'è. Si scivola. Sì, cosa c'è?
Può passare il carretto, guarda.
Sì, vedo. È bassissimo, sarà alto 1,50 m.
Adesso siamo dentro la montagna, sai? Adesso siamo dentro la montagna, sai?
Sì. Guardate il cinema.
Here you can also come a bit closer, so you'll see it better. And if you listen, back then were still working alone, and while they were working, they wore just like a really simple suit, and they didn't have basically no protection. The only piece of protection they had was this leather apron, leather apron at their lower back, which gave them just a basic support and protection for their work. And while they were working, they were at the beginning only using really simple tools like chisel and hammer. So they had to manually mine all the ore, and once the ore was mined, it also had to be manually carried out of the mine. And as you can imagine, this altogether was quite a slow process, and because of that, all the tunnels here at the beginning were quite a bit shorter. At some point, they were just high enough so they could crawl to them. And obviously, because it was also dark inside the mines, they had to use artificial lighting here. So at first, they were only using simple torches, but those were then soon replaced by oil lamps. And then they were using those for almost 400 years, basically until 19th century. Then they started first using more modern carbide lights, and then only in 20th century or in 60s they started using modern battery lamps. So those were then much safer because they didn't have open fire inside the mine anymore. Okay. No, this is just a simple winch, and this was used so they could lift water and ore to the surface when they were going deeper. Because at first they were only mining horizontally, so like this end of the main road, it just basically goes horizontally into a field. Only later they started going deeper as well. Okay. So also, if you have any questions about the mine or the tour, you can always ask me and I will try my best to answer.
Ok, allora questo era all'inizio della miniera che usavano solo degli oggetti semplici e quindi era un processo veramente lento e molto pericoloso perché vivevano nel freddo praticamente. Poi c'è un altro posto molto bello. Oh,
Okay, so right now we are here in the Chapel of Holy Trinity, and here miners used to pray before they went down this staircase to their workplace. And this staircase is also called Adam's Decline, and when it was fully opened, there were almost 1,000 stairs here, and this then led to a depth of approximately 200 meters underground. And now if you look above the altar here, you can first see in the middle the portrait of Holy Trinity, and then on the right we have a statue of Saint Barbara. So she is the protector of all the miners, and this is because she spent her whole life locked inside the Dark Tower, and this then reminded miners of their work inside the Dark Mines. And she was locked in this tower because she converted to Christianity against her father's will, and then he even executed her when she was just 28 years old. And because she was 28 years old when she died, all the miners' uniforms nowadays, like the one I'm wearing today, have 28 buttons. I'm interested in that. And then on the left here we have another statue, and this is Saint Acacius, and he's the protector of all the miners in Idrija here, because they found rich cinnabar ore for the first time in this town on his name day in 1508. So it was quite early in the history of this mine, and this discovery back then even saved the mine from closing. So in return for that, they chose him as their protector. And now if you just take another look down the staircase, you can see this platform down there. So in less than an hour, we will be standing there, because now we'll just make a circle tour, and at the end we'll come back up the staircase to this chapel.
Perché Diego non c'è problema, non mi venire davanti che se no entri nel video, sei piccolo.
We all here. Okay, so here you can then see just a bit newer method of mining the ore. As you can see now, the main difference is that the miners are already working in pairs, so they were comrades, and in that way it was a bit easier for them because they could share the physical load. As well, then it was a bit safer because they could take care of each other. And for work, they didn't just use simple tools like we saw earlier, but instead they were drilling holes, and for that they were using a steel rod and a hammer. So one of the miners was then spinning this steel rod around, and the other was hammering this steel rod into a rock, and this then worked like a sort of a drill. So they were drilling holes. In those holes they then put gunpowder, blew everything up, and then the material that was left over, it was loaded into a cart with help of plates like this one here. And then once the cart was full, it had to be pushed by miners on wooden planks out of the mine. And this particular type of a cart that you can see here, this one is also called trukta in Slovene, or if I translate this to English, it would mean something like a small casket. And this name comes of this, that the shape of a cart reminded them of a smaller casket. And one cart like this, when it was full, it could weigh up to 300 kilograms. And now here, if you just take a closer look of the miners, you can also see that they aren't wearing any protection yet. They wore just like a really simple suit. And what is then maybe interesting, that there was a period in this mine when the miners couldn't have pockets on their suits, because if they had pockets, they could be stealing rich cinnabar ore out of the mine. So even later on, you will see that the trust in a miner was quite low throughout the whole history, even until the end. It was really low here. Yeah. So one of the main indicators of how rich the ore was the color of it. So if the ore was like dark red, or even this is not that dark, but yeah, if it was red, it meant normally that it's cinnabar. And then the other indicator was the weight of it. Different types of support that they were using in here. You can actually see the three main types here. First, we here have the wooden support, so this was the most common, but I will explain more about this a bit later. But then if you just take a closer look behind you, you can see in this small part we have the steel support, And this type of support was in here used only in the last century, and then only in the places where the pressures were most severe. So this was actually the strongest of supports in here. And you also probably noticed, while we were walking through Antony's main road, almost all the tunnels are cladded with stone or masonry support. And this type of support was in here used only in places where they didn't mine ore anymore, but those tunnels then had a lot of traffic, so they were using those tunnels as entrances and exits to the mine. And yeah, also the whole Antony's main road served as an exit to the mine until they closed the whole mine. And nowadays it's a museum there. Okay. Thank you. That's here, sitting here a bit taller. Just maybe you can try a bit further at the back. Okay, so here we have then another two important works that the miners had to do besides all the mining. So firstly, they had to build wooden support inside all the tunnels so the ceilings wouldn't collapse on them. And for that, they were mainly using pine tree or spruce timber, because firstly, they had an abundance of this kind of wood in around the town, and also this wood then has a really special feature that is good for use in the mine, because under severe pressures, this wood started to squeak, and this then alerted miners of a possible danger. And also, for purposes of this mine, they cut down all the forests in around the town itself, so they also then had to start import this wood. And they were doing this by using rivers, so they were flooding all the wood on the rivers to the town. And then for that, they had to build plauge, or those are just dams on those rivers, so they could do this the whole year around, or even during the summer, when water levels were a bit lower, or much lower.
So they collected the water, and then when they wanted to send the wood,
basically. They had like, those dams had doors, so they could open it and then let all the water at once down the street.
With all the wood,
And with all the wood.
Okay,
You can actually, at the surface, you can see like a few pictures about this, I think.
Okay.
And also, then just a small portion of that wood went directly into the mine, so for the support, majority of it was actually used as fuel for furnaces in which they were smelting rich cinnabar ore. And now here, if you look behind you, you can then see the second important work here. So the miners had to backfill all the tunnels in here, because straight above us it's town Idrija, and if the tunnels below the town wouldn't be backfilled, there would be a big hole under the city, and then everything would collapse. But because they were then backfilling those tunnels with material, they slowed down this process of collapsing quite a bit. So nowadays the town itself is only collapsing a few centimeters a year. So it's kind of manageable. Yeah, but any questions here? So now here you can try and push the cart behind you.
It's heavy.
Yeah, but it's not 300 kilograms.
No.
So what you heard now, this is Martinez or Bergman, it was also called in here, and he had like a really special relationship with the miners. So miners every day gave him a piece of their meal, and in return for that he was showing them where the ore was located, and he was doing this by knocking. And then if miners didn't give him any food, he also started knocking where there was no ore. So he was a bit avengeful as well. And right now we are here then currently standing on the top of a blind shaft. The blind shaft is called because this shaft doesn't lead to the surface. It only connects different levels inside the mine. And when this shaft was still in use, only 1/3 of it was actually used for miners to go up and down the ladders. The other 2/3 were then used for material to be transported or ore to be transported further down. And now when we will also go about 15 meters lower down the shaft, we will leave Antony's main road behind us, so the oldest part of the mine here, and later we will see newer methods of mining the ore. And just before we start to go down, I need to warn you again stairs in here are really wet and slippery, so you need to be careful.
Metri sotto, 15 meter. Notte mamma. Non ho capito, forse era 15 meter, non 15. No, sto bene. Sì, è vero. È vero, le mani sono di ferro.
Io le fredde, però no.
Environment. Operating like making mine is really quite, it takes a heavy toll on the environment. Here just be a bit careful again on those two stairs in the corner.
Oh mio Dio. Che roba. Attenzione. Sì.
Can you just maybe, sorry, can you move a bit so and then just be a bit careful on the tracks. Okay, so here if you look behind this glass, you can then see a small drop of mercury inside the stone. So this is just one of the two ways that mercury was found in here, and this is actually just 100% mercury. And as you know, mercury is the only metal that is liquid under normal circumstances, and this type of mercury was then really easy to acquire. Miners had just to simply wash this stone with water, and then because mercury is heavier than water, it would sink to the bottom. And about, let's say, 30% of all the mercury in here were acquired in that way, so from the native mercury. The second largest mercury mine in the world, or was at least. About 13% of all the mercury came from here, and then the only bigger mine was in Spain, but together they are then nowadays listed under the UNESCO. Really quickly. And then the fumes are really dangerous.
Yeah, that's when they heat up, it sounds even worse.
Yeah, it was so much worse.
Yeah.
So before they could start to mine the ore here, they had to firstly locate areas where ore could be found, and those areas were also called ore bodies. And every ore body in here had its own name, so it was then easier to navigate once they were inside. And right now we are here currently then standing in the ore body profile. And once they started to mine ore at one ore body, they always started doing this at the bottom of it, and then they were slowly moving upward. So first they dug one active level at the bottom, and then they were digging side tunnels to this active level. And then once they came to the end of ore in one side tunnel, they then abandoned it, backfilled it with material, and right next to it they dug another one. And they were then repeating this process over and over again until they mined all the ore at one level, and then they just simply moved one level up. And they were using this method of slowly moving upwards because of safety purposes, because as you can imagine, it was much safer to have backfill tunnels below you than above you. It was simple as that. And also, as I mentioned before, we are here currently standing in the ore body Kropatsch. We are at 20th level here, so this was the highest level in this particular ore body, meaning that there were or there are 19 other levels below us right now. And then the size or the amount of levels depends on how big the ore body is. Any questions? Okay, so now we will move further down this gallery, and if you will look to our left and right, those are actually all backfill tunnels now.
Yeah, the two.
Bevi la birretta. Elvin?
And then, like, it depends how big the cinnabar ore is. So it contains more mercury, so it's then heavier. And at the surface, I will show you one example of, let's say, really rich cinnabar ore.
Many people, they think that cinnabar is we put in our own gas is lucky.
Sorry.
Serviva il casco.
Cinnabar is lucky, so we are putting
Sì.
in our room.
So cinnabar is not really dangerous because the mercury is, it's not in natural state. It's not like
Yes.
100% mercury.
It's not.
So cinnabar is not really dangerous. Okay, so number 10, if you listen. And in 60s, this mine had its last golden era, meaning that the prices of mercury back then were still high, and so were then the profits. And with all the profits, they could afford to buy new equipment. But with all the new equipment, then they drastically reduced the physical work, but then they also had two major side effects to this. So the first side effect was the noise that was then in the mines, and because of that, miners then had a lot of problem with hearing. And also there was then a lot of dust left in the air, and this then affected their health. But nonetheless, with one loading shower like this, they could simply and efficiently load up carts. And once the carts were full, like this one here is also called Hund, and this, when it was full, it could weigh up to 800 kilograms. And again, it had to be pushed by miners on tracks, firstly from the side tunnel to this turning table here, where they would then turn it and push it further down the gallery to the next shaft, where this material or ore was then transported further down.
And they had to also, I guess, keep the tracks clean all the time. Because,
Yeah,
yeah, it was fine. Okay, yeah.
They didn't have like any material in
No,
here.
okay, no, they kept it clean.
But so normally when they were digging side tunnels, they were normally digging them under some angles, so
Yeah.
it was then easier to push the carts
Yeah.
on the like main track.
Of course, it makes sense. Yeah.
And also all the machines that were used in this mine had to be powered by compressed air, because obviously they couldn't be using diesel or petrol engines in here.
They were suffocating.
Yeah. And this compressed air was transported to the mine from surface, and for that they were using pipes that you can now see behind you.
Oh.
So first we have here on the top this thin pipe, so this was used for compressed air, and the pipe below, so the big one, was then used for air circulation inside the mine.
Okay, wow. And how early could they use these machines with the air?
You mean the
like
everything was in 60s, all the machines.
Okay.
Previously it was mainly like just physical work.
Yeah, okay, yeah.
Okay, so here just be a bit careful for this pipe so you don't get hurt here, and you can come a bit closer in. And I will just firstly show you how dusty it was in here when they were using machines. So as you can see, once they started using machines in here, they were left with quite a lot of dust in the air after. And this was especially a big problem at the beginning, because obviously miners didn't have any protection from all the dust. The most that they could do to protect themselves was just to put a piece of fabric over their mouths and noses, so they would then breathe less of this air in. Only then in the last decades, they were then given masks, but the first ones weren't really effective yet. Only the ones, like this one here, that were used in the last 5 to 10 years protected miners from all the dust as well as the mercury fumes that were in the air. And in here miners had problems with two diseases. The first one is called silicosis, or this is the settling of the dust inside the lungs, and the second one was then mercury poisoning. You need to know, as I mentioned before, mercury starts to evaporate at room temperatures, and while they were still working in here, the temperatures were quite a bit higher. So miners were then constantly 8 hours a day exposed to the high amounts of mercury in the air, and this mercury started to slowly accumulate inside their bodies. And the problem with mercury is once it enters your body, it's really hard to get rid of it. So miners were then slowly poisoned by it. The first sign of mercury poisoning was that their teeth started to fall out, and then eventually it completely destroyed their whole nervous system. So because of that, they also had a lot of problem with mental illnesses in here. And also because of all the dust and mercury fumes that were in the air, miners were dying really young as well. So normal life expectancy for one miner was somewhere between 35 and 40 years in the last period. Previously it was even lower.
It was lower before.
Yeah, well,
But there was also accidents maybe, and not also.
yeah, but even like the average life expectancy for all
general,
was low.
yeah,
In general, yeah,
that's
in
true.
general was low. Yeah. But then like even like the workers that were working inside the smelting plant, they were exposed to even higher amounts of mercury in the air.
Yeah.
So they were then dying even younger.
Wow.
Their life expectancy was below 30.
Wow.
Here, just again, be careful for the pipe.
Appena detto.
You have number 12 here.
Yes.
So miners had to firstly drill holes, and in those holes then separate miners that were responsible for explosives, put dynamite, and normally they blasted this at the end of their shift. So all the dust that came with the explosions could settle down before the next miners arrived. And here you can then see the whole process of blasting. So different colors of light or different circles are just meant to represent different times of an explosion. So firstly the inner circle or the red one would explode, and then with a delay of a few milliseconds the outer ones. And this was all done for safety, because if everything would explode at once, all the material from the explosion would be pushed out of the tunnel at once, and this would be then harmful for the miners. As well, it would destroy all the wooden support that was already built. But because they were then using smaller explosions, only a small portion of the material was actually pushed out of the tunnel, and then there was space left behind, so material from next explosions could simply collapse behind. And also, while they were blasting in here, they were doing this at a quite slow pace, so just 1 to 2 meters at once maximum, because obviously they couldn't be really using big explosions.
And this was around what, 17th century?
So, like, they were blasting even before, but they just didn't use like dynamite.
Okay.
They were so
Gunpowder.
they started using gunpowder in 17th century.
Okay. Okay.
And
And when they use dynamite with the milliseconds, that's only lately, right?
yeah,
To control it.
this was later.
Yeah.
And now here we need one volunteer who will do the honors.
Vai Diego.
Just push this down. So tomorrow we can start working in here.
Domani ti aspettano a lavorare, Diego.
But like, just imagine this wouldn't be even considered to be loud. When they were blasting in here, it was so loud that it was also heard on the surface.
Yeah.
So
And how did they do it? A long cable to do it? Like
like they obviously couldn't be standing
No,
right
no, no.
here.
Yeah, of course, but,
They,
but I
they
mean
had-
all the way maybe. Or,
They had to move like at least around the corner.
okay. Yeah.
Okay, so now here we will have to do with cinnabar ore as well as the native mercury. And now if you look closely here, you can actually see it. So firstly, the red veins here, this is then the cinnabar ore,
Quello lì Mercurio,
and then
tutte
the
le
shiny
robe
bit is the
luccicante.
native mercury. You see it? And then on the bottom here, we have another stone. So this is tooth, or this is just the sediment of volcanic ash. And it's not really explained how those types of stone came in here, because this wasn't ever like volcanically active area. So they had to be carried here through tectonic movement and through millions of years.
So they took stone and how to collect mercury from stone.
So native mercury, they could just wash it with water. So, but then they also put everything into a smelting plant, and then they burnt it at high temperatures, and then mercury was evaporated a bit. So So this
They
was,
collect.
Quello degli Etruschi.
they basically used distillation to
Usavano
turn
il tufo per
from
fare le robe,
fumes
le
back
tombe.
to liquid.
No mercury that like water is here and no
Cos'è la
mercury.
sconza?
That is only mercury collecting through.
Sconza. Una roba
No,
scura,
like they have two
ricca di
ways. So
mercurio.
one was the native mercury. So this was like this one here. This is just basically already liquid mercury, and this was they just washed this with water and then it would sank to the bottom of it, and it was easy to collect. Then the other way of collecting mercury was then from smelting cinnabar ore. This would be like this. Yeah, those were quite common, but they wouldn't be like considered to be big extracts.
No.
Because they affected only a few people.
Yeah.
Sure. And then they were also making geological maps of the whole mine. And those maps were used so they could in advance decide which ore is one location. Because at first when they were mining in here, they didn't actually know if they will find rich ore or not. So they were mainly relying on pure luck, or perkmanus, if you believe that story. And then only in 60s they started using prospective boring. And with the help of it, they were drilling holes and then they were acquiring rock samples of it. So they were using drills like this one that were again powered by compressed air. And with the help of those, they could drill holes up to 120 meters long. And then they were acquiring rock samples out of the stone with the help of diamond drills. And those samples were then taken from here to the surface, to the left, where they would analyze them and decide how much mercury is in those samples. And then, if there was enough mercury, they could start to mine the ore at the location where they were exploring. And just for a bit of perspective, so at the beginning, or let's say in the first 400 years, they were mining really good quality ores in here, and those types of ores had about 60 or sometimes even 70% of mercury in them. But then in the last era, or in the last 30 years, they started to mine just really poor quality ores, and those types of ores had then much less than 1% of mercury in them. So the drop-off was really severe. But this was because they already mined all the good ore. And then there was even like a period in this mine when it was more profitable to smelt the old ore that was already smelted because it contains more mercury than the new ore that they were mining.
So like all the backfills and all these.
Because at the beginning when they were smelting, they had like a really low efficiency, just about 50% or just a bit above that. But then in the last era they had newer furnaces, and they could like extract over 90% of the mercury.
And has it all the time been sold primarily for metal, like to use with other metals?
So it
silver
was
and gold
the main purpose of mercury was for gold mining and silver mining, because mercury actually melts gold. So then you are left with a mixture of gold and mercury, and you just need to evaporate mercury out of it. So
that's the main.
it was so for that it was then exported to South and Central America.
Where they have gold.
Where they were mining gold.
Of course.
Because even like the discovery of mercury here, it's almost in the same
as
year
America.
as Columbus discovered. This was 2 years prior.
Good timing, so we should be.
So you are probably wondering, like, they were always transporting all the ore down the shaft, and this had to be done because not every level was connected to the main shaft, which then led to the surface. So in our case, we are currently here at the Miniere level. We are about 22 meters below entering the main road, and in order for ore from here to be transported to the surface, it would have to be first we dropped another 100 meters down different shafts to the fourth main level or obsoria, and only then it could be transported to the surface via Joseph shaft. And in those main shafts, they were then operating elevators, so they could easily lift this.
So that's the deep shaft, and they put everything and then back. Okay.
Because it was much easier to just transport everything down, and then at a few points.
That was all the time bringing up.
And then once the ore came to the surface, it was then transported further to the smelting plant, where it was firstly sorted, and then the material that was left over, it was brought back to the mine, and it was used for backfilling of all the tunnels.
Okay.
And also, the majority of carts that they were using in here had to be pushed by miners. Only on the few main levels, or Gloria, they were then using small battery trains.
Okay, that was the deepest levels actually. So because they were the biggest
No.
ones.
Yeah.
Or next deepest, yeah.
So they had multiple main levels, and the lowest was almost 400 meters underground.
Yeah, wow.
So this was actually even below the sea level.
Do you know how deep they got before the 60s, like before all the technology?
So
How?
if you, I don't know for sure, but if you later on at the surface, we have like a big board, and you can actually see the eras where they were mining.
Yeah. Okay. Yes. Thank you.
Then look there.
Yeah, of course, it's specific. Yeah. I was just curious because it seems so slow at the time.
Yeah.
So
We called it mine. So they all knew where some points were.
yeah.
Okay, so here we have number 17, but you can skip this one because the thing that the audio guide is describing worked really well, so it was easier to navigate once they were inside.
Exactly.
And also then you need to take in account that the galleries like this one wouldn't be lit with electricity.
No.
They were only using headlamps in here,
Yeah.
or previously oil lamps.
Oil lamps, yeah.
So yeah. And then on a few levels, they also arranged smaller storages for explosives. And then the miners that were responsible for handling of those explosives brought them here at the beginning of their shift from the central storage that was on the 4th main level. So they were basically spreading those explosives throughout the whole mine. So they weren't all stored at one location, and this was obviously done for safety purposes.
Yeah.
And in here they were then also separately storing explosives and detonators, so they didn't have any unwanted accidents.
Oh, yeah.
And the whole storage was locked, so obviously the miners couldn't be stealing explosives from it. They didn't trust them really that much.
Jeg så det var næsten sikkert i starten. Ja. Ikke? Og det er lidt mere old.
Oh, buongiorno.
And during their work, miners also took a shorter break, and then they built benches, normally near their workplace and in places where there was no wind. And only then they could enjoy in their really simple meals, which they normally brought with themselves from the surface.
Yeah.
And those consisted just of a slice of a bread and some sort of a fruit, and with it they were then drinking poor quality coffee. And every day they were also then given a slice of bacon, which was meant for them to chew, so they would then protect their teeth from falling out. Because, as I mentioned before, the first sign of mercury poisoning was that their teeth start to fall out. But this wasn't the most effective way of protection, as you can imagine, but even miners didn't use it properly. They just normally put this bacon inside the pocket and then carry it to the surface, and it was then later used for everyday cooking. And also, for same reason, so for protection from mercury, they were given a strong alcoholic drink, or garush it's also called, and it's a mixture of pharmaceutical alcohol, so 94% alcohol, water and herbal tea. And it wasn't really meant for them to drink, it was just so they could wash their mouths with it, and then spit it out with all the mercury. But obviously it wasn't effective because miners started drinking it. And then no wonder that they also saw Berkman sometimes, because they were quite under heavy influence of alcohol. So during the break they also then had some time off, so they could start telling each other stories, and they also did some mischief to each other. So for example, they were stealing lunches, and everything was then blamed on Berkman. And you can actually see him there. And now I will just turn off all the lights in here for a few moments, so you will get a feeling of how really dark it is in here. And can I just ask you to please cover the screens of your audio guides so they won't disturb the dark, okay? Ready? Just
Dove sono?
So on every level, they also arranged as one toilet for the miners, and this toilet was then once a week cleaned. And firstly, this was meant more as a punishment for two miners, but then they soon realized that it was actually better to clean the toilets than to work the whole day inside the mine. So they. Okay, so if you listen, you have number 21 here. And we are currently standing on the top of another blind shaft, but this one is still in use today, so all the wood that is needed for renovation of this museum is brought here up, and this is then connected to another entrance. And also the sound that you are hearing now, this is just the sound of the air that is going through this grill, because this shaft also serves as ventilation shaft. So all the air is here sucked out of the mine, and then close to the entrance there is another shaft where the air is then pushed back into the mine. And now I will just quickly lift this grill up so you will hear then the sound stops. It's just because airflow is so strong, the air starts to whistle. When it goes through.
And how did it do in the very beginning? They added naturally.
Yeah, they didn't have like anything.
No.
Also in 500 years, they dug approximately 700 kilometers of tunnels in here, but nowadays only 5 kilometers are still open. Everything else is flooded with water or filled with material, and where the tunnels are nowadays filled with material, water then needs to be constantly pumped out, so those tunnels don't start to collapse really quickly. And because of that, there is actually still 8 miners employed nowadays. So they are taking care of all the water pumping, and they are also renovating all the 5 kilometers of tunnels that are still open. And now we are walking through this gallery, and if you can look here, you can see that we have here a bit special support. So this was polygon types of support, and this is just the predecessor to the steel support we saw earlier. So this support is the strongest of wooden supports, because it can take pressures from the top as well as from the side. And in 500 years of operating, this mine was only closed twice. It firstly happened in 1977, and then it was closed for a shorter period of time, reopened, and eventually it completely closed in 1990. This was all a result of that the prices of mercury were slowly dropping in the era after the Second World War, because they were discovering how poisonous the mercury really was, or is, and so they were then using it less and less, and eventually the demand for mercury plummeted so much that, and then also the prices, of course, so they didn't produce any profit here anymore. So in 70s they had to close the whole mine for the first time, but then they reopened it, but not so they could produce profit. It was just so they could allow easier transition for the town. But in late 80s, they decided to completely close the mine, but they couldn't just left it as it was, so they had to do also some additional work on it. And for that, they were using two methods. So the first one is shown here. So tanks like this one were filled with material, and once the tank was full, the material was pushed with the help of compressed air down the pipes to the tunnel that they were backfilled. And once one tunnel was backfilled, those pipes needed to be carried by the miners to the next one. So this was quite long and still a hard process, and it was also extremely unpopular between the miners. And then the second method that they were using during the closing, it was used mainly for strengthening of already previously closed tunnels. And this could be done even from the surface. So they were then drilling holes with machines like we saw earlier. And through those holes they then injected concrete into the mine. So they would strengthen the whole bit. And this whole process of closing lasted almost 20 years, and it was finalized in 2009. And from then on, as I mentioned before, this mine just needs to be taken care of.
Yeah.
Okay, do you now have any questions for me? Okay, this is actually the last point. So all we have to do now is just to go back up the stairs to the chapel and then back to the surface. And here just be a bit careful again, because planks are really slippery.
Ok. Occhio tanto. Tanto. State attenti. Ah, sono queste le scale.
Quali sono?
And can I just ask the last one in the group to please close the wooden doors here behind us? Did you copy me? Did you hear me? Okay. And also while we are going up, you can count the stairs if you want. There are quite a few of them.
Cosa hai detto?
Con calma, non lo so.
Sopra devo andare. Sì. Cosa c'è? Me lo dici dopo, vai. Vero? No, legno. Oh, c'ho questo scalino. Sono disceso a ste scalini.
So if you are counting, now we are almost at the half point.
Ok.
But at least now you can see the chapel on top here. Okay?
Occhio che quelle scale diventano più strette. Essa. Mamma mia, bellon. Lo rifarei. Che roba. Ok, che qua si scivola. Ho sbattuto la testa per la terza volta. Acqua. Vale. Vedo l'uscita. È bello perché anche nel punto più basso c'era una ragnatele, quindi brava che c'era vita. Adesso arriva il caldo.
So now please first leave all your bags at this stand here. Firstly, here we have really example of really rich cinnabar ore, and it is estimated that the amount of mercury in here is about 60%. And you can feel it in the weight of it because it's really heavy. You can try it for yourself, and then just pass it around.
60%.
About 60%, yeah.
Diego, attento.
Estimation is not for certain.
Lo fai? Ah, boh, non aspettavo di più. Ah, non so. Oh, le. La densità di mercurio è di 13,6 grammi per centimetro cubo. Quindi
And then for comparison, here we have the same amount of water and mercury. So as you know, 1 liter of water is 1 kilogram, but 1 liter of mercury will be 13.6 kilograms. So it's almost 14 times heavier than water itself. And you can try then the weight difference here.
è quello lì è pieno. It's full.
So, no, this one is.
Ah, ok.
But nowadays mercury is available in market. Where from? Mine is closed.
So there
questa
are still
qua,
a few
ok.
mines left open around the world.
Oh madonna.
Few are left
Ecco
in
cane.
Russia, China,
Lo voglio a
and then
casa.
South America as well.
Lo voglio.
Yeah, but like
Lo voglio a
there's
casa,
some
Gio, se lo porti a
water
casa si angia morto.
calculation,
5 kilograms.
even more. And then 1 or 2 kilograms for the bottle itself. And now you can try it, but this one is